and thank you everybody for joining us this morning. My name's Dominic Piper. I'm the editor of Australia's Paydirt and Gold Mining Journal. Thanks for joining us. As Jenny said, we've got a esteemed panel to take us through our first panel discussion. You'll see on the programme today there's a lot of panels, and the reason being is, as I think Bill mentioned in his opening remarks, and certainly it came out from Linda's comments, the Minister's comments, and indeed Warren's comments just earlier, that there's still so much up in the air, and there's still so much education to be had in this segment of the Australian resources sector. So we're going to endeavour to try and get our head around so many different aspects of it in the next couple of days. So if you've got any burning questions or interesting ideas, or even just a comment that you want to put forward, please make sure you're in the room for each of the panels. After a couple of minutes, we'll ask for questions from the floor. Just raise your hand and tell us who you are, and then fire away our panellists. I will introduce our panellists very quickly again. First of all, we have Phil Baker of GHD, who we'll be hearing from in the next session, I believe, Phil. Next to Phil is Warren, who you've just heard from. Nicole Roocke from Mineral Research Institute of WA is next. I'm not going to say you're going to represent the state government here, but you're the closest we've got in this regard. And then, of course, Chris Vernon from the CSIRO. And again, I'm not saying you're going to represent all of the research community here in Australia, but, you know, we'll have a crack.
How come Chris doesn't get to represent the federal government?
The federal government, I know.
Well, it's got to be fair.
I'm not allowed to.
We do have geoscience.
Well, I'm not either, but, you know, I'm going to...
We'll have a crack.
We do have Geoscience Australia tomorrow, Chris, so you might be able to save yourself.
Oh, that's excellent.
Thank you all for joining us. I think Warren's piece was fantastic just then to set the scene, really, and the Minister's comments this morning. In that 12 months ago, we gathered here for this conference, and it was full of enthusiasm and buoyancy about the potential for Australia and Western Australia to have a world-leading, or at least competitive, downstream value addition sector. 12 months on, and as is the way in the resources sector, we're all looking with great disappointment that dream has crashed, and we will never be a downstream producer again. But such is the pendulum swings of this sector. So I think the best place to start really is to sort of gather our thoughts and gather exactly where we are. And Nicole, I'm going to start with you, because you haven't spoken yet, and ask, I mean, given these shifting market conditions and the delays we've seen in projects as well, those projects that are up and coming here in Western Australia and in Australia, I mean, are our downstream ambitions more precarious than they were 12 months ago?
I certainly don't think they're more precarious, but I do acknowledge that there's some real challenges in what West Australia and Australia is trying to do from an ambitions-wise. I mean, Warren talked to the sheer size and scale of investment that other governments are using to incentivise activities, but I think it was part of Linda's presentation was talking about China. That didn't happen overnight, and they took a long-term strategic view to attract investment and deliver projects over a longer time cycle. And I think one of our challenges here in Western Australia is we're in a mining jurisdiction, and we're used to a boom and bust cycle, and so we take a very short-term view to some of these projects. So what is it that we fundamentally need to look at doing differently so that we can ride out those busts, continue a long-term focus on things? And, you know, political and election campaigns and election cycles don't always help in that as well. So it's not just industry, but it's how do we get beyond what is a very short-term cycle into something that actually creates an ambition. We acknowledge that we're going to go up and down, but over the long term, won't be a linear path, but we'll progressively get there.
Thanks, Nicole. Chris, I mean, you're similarly in the research world caught between short-term cycles and longer-term ambitions. Has the changes, shifting landscape we've seen in the last 12 months and beyond altered the work that you're doing and the approach that you're taking?
No, it hasn't. It's in fact, if anything, it sort of steels you and says, we've got to get out of this boom-bust cycle of digging up rocks, and the price of rocks has gone down, and let's stop doing it. I think if we can develop that more downstream industry and develop different relationships for where we're selling our ores, our products, it actually cushions us from a lot of this, the boom bust. So I think getting much closer relationships with the consumer of more advanced materials is where we should really be. So we haven't stopped doing what we're doing, we're pressing well ahead.
And in those relationships, are you seeing Australian research and innovation and its position as a potential downstream producer, value addition producer, is that position elevated to where it was 4, 5 or 6 years ago, or are we still less competitive than we were with other nations?
No, we're already yesterday I had an overseas company, I won't mention who they are, through the door saying, what have you got to offer in Australia? What's the technology like? Can we buy into this? And this is a common theme we see. Being CSIRO, we get a lot of overseas companies coming through the door saying, well, they're more than just tyre kicking, they're trying to figure out who's who in the Australian zoo and what do we know. And very often, they're very interested in our grasp of the technology. So I think we're in a really good position. I think we've got a good reputation around the world as a place that you can come to get things done. It's just a matter of getting on with it and doing it.
Chris, I want to stick one more question with you before we move on to Warren and Phil. We quite often, and Warren made mention of this in his comments, we quite often assume ourselves as a dig and ship nation, and we have very little downstream skills. If you're saying that companies are coming to you looking for what skills and technology we have, are we being a little bit harsh on ourselves? Is Australia actually more advanced than we realise?
I think we do get a little bit harsh with ourselves. We only have to look around at some of the successes recently. BHP turning itself from a primary nickel producer into a nickel battery grade nickel sulphate producer. And they had the idea, let's do it. And together with CSIRO, we just built the pilot plant and they went ahead and did it. We've seen AVL, VSUN recently with the vanadium electrolyte plant launched in January. Great leap forward. Who else is out there, Nicole? FBI CRC with the cathode precursor plant. We learned a lot. We couldn't make cathode beforehand, but suddenly we're finding that we've actually grown quite a lot of researchers and a few in industry who now understand how that process works. So I think we're in a good spot.
Thanks, Nicole. I see you desperately get the microphone.
Yeah, I am. I'm giving that microphone back. I think we are in a good spot, but I also think research in Australia faces the same challenges that industry faces as well. One is cyclical funding. When you look at the statistics of investment by industry and by governments in Australia, it's progressively declined over a long period of time, and it's not great. The point of research is to be working on things today that are not yet possible. And so what is it that, we're not doing consulting pieces of work which is about using existing knowledge. It's about what do we need to be creating knowledge on today so that we can find alternative ways of doing things. It's very much about how do we look at what's happening in China and what are the challenges that they're facing in how they're producing midstream inputs into the battery value chain, and how do we do it differently. It's not about how do we recreate exactly the same skills, but how do we take their problems and turn them to our advantage? How do we cut out processes? Why is it that we separate nickel and cobalt completely and then reblend them? Is there other ways? Can we use research to be able to do things differently so that we can create advantages here in Australia? But also we're not great at commercialising our research outcomes. Great example recently is some glycine heat leaching technology. That was a spin-off company out of Curtin. I'm not sure if CSIRO had a role in the glycine heat leaching. No. Spun-off company here in Western Australia, but we couldn't scale up because our market wasn't big enough here in Western Australia. So it got sold to a Czechoslovakian company because they had a global network. So again, the challenge for places like Western Australia is how do we actually scale up and get I think, Warren used the words, but also the Minister used the words, how do we get investors to choose WA so that we can actually do that scale up?
Warren, that comes nicely back to the production tax credit and your comments earlier in the report AMEC has put out. I mean, is it really about levelling the playing field where we can to ensure that we become take advantage of the skills and the advantages that we have?
I think absolutely. So really what's changed is we're in a situation, broadly speaking, we were quite competitive before global interventions. Now, we might have been more expensive than other places, but we offered other benefits. We've got a highly skilled workforce, we've got a place you can do state-of-the-art developments, and you've got strong government support for those things to move forward in the approvals process and a very certain regulatory framework. We're looking at a very big opportunity. What you're now seeing is the Commonwealth finally realising that essentially that opportunity that was in front of us has been displaced by other nations trying to take it from us. What we've got to do is get ourselves back to a more competitive playing field. That means incentives to attract the investment in the first place. In a lot of times that's getting the capital in the investment for the development of the project. In operations we're profitable. There's a lot of value here. But also it means being able to develop the know-how to actually do these things. And in some spaces in critical minerals, we've started the hardest part with the lithium hydroxide. There's some much more likely spaces in this value-adding piece for us in vanadium, in graphite, where more of that technology is available. You can buy it, it's trademarked, it's not held behind priority walls by international companies. So it's a combination of things. The other thing we've got to try and do, I think, is continue to make it an attractive place for overseas companies to come and invest and build in Western Australia or Australia. If we do that, then we get the advantages of the technology and the research they've already developed. We get the investment here and the economic opportunities come as well. I guess the bit that concerns me about what sort of happened with the IRA is what the United States is really asking us to do is to stop being China's raw material supplier and become their raw material supplier. Well, that's great, but we've already got someone to sell our product to. What else can we do as part of that? And the bit that sort of, I think, has finally got the Commonwealth over the line is realising that if Australia's going to get more benefit of the incentives that are available through the IRA, to free trade agreement countries, we've got to put something on the table ourselves to show we're a participant in making this supply chain outside of China work.
Thanks, Warren. Phil, you're about to speak in the next session about building critical minerals hubs, and it strikes me that this discussion about this nexus between industry and research and government could really benefit from bringing not just lithium hydroxide, for instance, development together, but together with nickel sulfate and together with other steps in the supply chain or other aspects of the supply chain to create an overall ecosystem, if you like. Is that a fair comment?
Yes. Look, I don't share the same optimism as some of my colleagues on the panel here, and I say that respectfully. We've done a significant amount of consultation with a lot of producers across the industry and also with infrastructure providers and other such parties. I think the challenges, sometimes I think we forget that the critical minerals industry is not a mine, it's everything else. It's all the supply chain, it's all the infrastructure, logistics that goes with that. We talked a bit about the refining and all the processing refining, and that realistically is a function of what off-take agreements we can secure, because we can't produce something without having an ability to send it somewhere. I do like your point about the fact that we're selling stuff to China. Let's not stop that tomorrow. Let's keep doing that as part of developing other things. I think the scale of research and development that we have been working on, while there's some admirable steps that we've achieved, it really needs to ramp up tenfold. And we've got a 10-year challenge there. Even if we start tomorrow with all of our universities and get courses written, get lecturers prepared, send them overseas to understand things, come back, it's going to be 6, 8, 10 years before graduates start to walk out the door, and we need tenfold more than we've got now. That's on the, and I'm stating the obvious. I don't think there's anyone in the room here that wouldn't know that. But where my real problem is, and this is the topic of something I'll discuss in the next session, is the capital infrastructure. I work at GHD, I work in our management consulting arm, so we deal with banks. There's not a single week go by where a big bank doesn't come to us and they say, we've got 200, 400, 800 or a super fund, 800 million, a billion, 2 billion, we want to invest in the critical minerals industry because our board said, critical minerals industry, you've got to invest there. And the fund managers and the banking investment fraternity are saying to us, well, how do we do this? I had a discussion with a significant household name recently. I couldn't identify one investment-ready project in Australia for them. They want to invest, they want to dig up dirt. You guys do this very well. They don't want to dig up dirt. They're not necessarily party to signing off-take structures and agreements, although they do like to influence them when they're investing a lot of money. But what they do want to invest in is roads, is railway lines, is water supply, is power supply, is ports, all the things that are absolutely critical to our industry, as well as the dirt. We heard Firefly talking just before. One of the advantages you've got with your copper deposit, you have ready infrastructure there to lean on. We have some marvellous deposits. Australia is very well endowed. We have some great precincts, the central West Arana precinct in New South Wales. We've got the Northwest Minerals province in Queensland. We've got a belt in Western Australia that's just about the envy of every country on the planet, even though it stretches for about 400 kilometres. But the roads, the railway lines, the water supply, the skilled resources to underpin them needs billions and billions and billions spent. And there are investment parties lining up to bring money to the table. They've written up funds they want to invest. Their remit is you go and invest in energy and resources in OECD nations, yet they can't spend the money. The money is there, they can't spend it because we don't have investment-ready projects. So apart from developing our skilled resources, apart from developing technologies to process minerals, and I agree we started with the tough one with lithium, apart from developing that, we also need to put our nose to the grindstone, and the federal government and the relative state governments need to stand up here a bit. It is an industry-led solution. The banks and investment houses will come to the party if things can be there. You know, I'd love tomorrow to be able to sit down, okay, here's an investment business case for a railway line, a high-class railway line from Mount Isa to Townsville, an electrified high-class railway line. Because when we sell our minerals, and we sell them particularly into the EU, they've got to compete with the new carbon requirements. So we can't use diesel trains anymore. We've got to have electric trains. So there's a significant amount of money that we need to invest to make our critical minerals industry successful, as well as getting our mineral, yielding the benefit of the actual endowment we have and the minerals and the deposits and the quality of the resources that we're accessing. I'll talk a bit more about this later, but that's my primary concern. The critical minerals industry is not just the dirt; it's everything to a ship going offshore.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
I'll steal Chris's microphone this time. I really agree with you there, Phil, in terms of the need for that infrastructure. There's some real challenges for government, though, in choosing where it invests what is its scarce resources when it's got to choose between resources sector, education sector, health sector, when it's on its when it's working within 3 or 4 year election cycle campaigns, and when you have many individual companies coming in to make pitches for their projects. And so for governments to be able to take that longer term view, I mean, they did, and everyone holds up the Dampier to Bunbury natural gas pipeline as an example, where the government took a long term view, made a commitment. There was a patch of time where the state government looked like, or the state looked like it was going to go bankrupt because of that investment. But now it's held up as being a success because it's enabled all industry. But there's other pipelines that, gas pipelines that the state government invested into that actually ended up in disasters as well. So I absolutely agree there needs to be that really long-term view taken in terms of what the infrastructure requirements are. But actually, governments need information from industry about not the sales pitch, not the marketing pitch, not the funding and financing pitches, but actually what is it that they're going to need and when are they going to need it, or else we're going to end up in that same paradigm that we've ended up in the Midwest in relation to the magnetite industry. The magnetite mines can't get up and running without Oakajee Port. Oakajee Port won't get funded without the magnetite mines being up and running. So how do we break that paradigm? How do we get that longer term view so that we can not just do the mining, but like you indicated, start progressively building on that mining and not assume that it's going to be miners doing the onshore processing necessarily, that it's actually how do we get the people who have got the IP and the capability and the know-how to bring their investment onshore.
Nicole, that's a really interesting point. I think, did you want to go, Chris?
I was just going to say, actually, with limited resources, a limited amount of time to act, Warren, which are your favourite children? Which project should we be favouring? Which are the ones to invest in right now? And I'm sorry, which of your favourite children?
Yeah, okay. Well, I've got about 330 exploration companies, and they're all excellent investments. No, look, I guess I look at the ones that are going to look at two things. One is where we think the demand's going to come from and where the opportunities are, but also where there's strong government support. If you line those two things up, we're going to be successful. That's pretty much what all our competitors have done. It's industry and government working closely together. You look at the success of South Korea and Japan over the last 50, 60 years, they work together. We don't. If you look at the success in China, they've got long-term policies supported and often cases driven by government. We're very much the other way around. It's there at last resort, maybe not. We've got to change that thinking. Not because we don't believe in market policies driving successful industries, but because the nature of the world has changed. We're now in strategic competition, and everyone is trying to take this industry. And it's not just because they want security or sovereignty over a particular supply chain or minerals going into particular industries. It's because of the value. The absolute immense value. This is the fastest growing industry in the world. We're talking trillions of dollars of value. And we're at the ground floor of it because the minerals start here in a lot of cases. We're one of the world's largest raw material suppliers of a lot of these critical minerals. How do we grow that? So for me, it's looking at where we've got significant resources, where there's going to be government support. But no, I won't name a particular project or company. Come and talk to me privately. Have a chat with the companies at the booth.
Warren, can I ask, on that subject, you had a group of 11 companies up there, the vast majority of which are existing raw material producers, miners. We hear down the years that miners don't want to be processors, they don't want to be chemical companies. How vital is it that we attract those international investors to do some of that, or if not all of that processing?
Yeah, it's been a bit of both. I think the bit that's been challenging around it is, well, when we talked about value adding in Australia, we've talked about it with exploration companies hoping to develop a mine, and then they're trying to do the processing and the value adding at the same time. That's really been a bridge too far. In reality, unless they could find an international partner who wanted to come and invest here, the chance of that happening wasn't too good, partly because to get our mine up, we need an off-take partner. Our off-take partner is the customer who's going to do the processing. If they're going to underwrite the development of the mine, that's a great outcome. We haven't got a lot of leveraging to say, well, you've got to come to Australia, we're not going to turn the project. So the miners piece has been important because they're looking for extra value. And also, a lot of those companies are Australian created, Australian listed, Australian owned businesses who want to do something here in Australia and really want to get away from the dig and ship mentality and try and find value somewhere else. But the reason we chose those 11 was because they were the ones who actually had genuine prospects and had done the work. So we had numbers we could put together that we could provide to Treasury. When you look around Australia, we've done this work for Treasury in the last month or so, there's about 70 odd projects that have got downstream potential. Probably within that, there's about 20 that look relatively prospective, and maybe a dozen that might potentially get up if the right level of government support's there. So there's more on offer than people think. The question is, how much do we really want to go after? And recognising that it's not just a 3 or 4 year thing, it's okay to get critical minerals mines up, and a second step down the road once they've been able to develop some cash reserves to support them investing in downstream. We can get there at a staged approach as well. It doesn't have to be all at once. And I think that's where we sort of overshot at the start, which was, right, we're going to go from exploration to mining to processing all at once. That was probably always going to be a bridge too far for us.
And then the next bridge, I assume, is then how far downstream do we go? You know, Chris, if you've got any comment on this, I mean, will in our most wildest ambitions, will we be a producer of batteries that are then exported from here to we don't have any car in here, so somewhere else for car?
I always dodge this one by saying, as far as makes sense. I think, though, we see some sense in the state looking at the battery supply chain, that you don't have to make batteries to be in the supply chain. So you can make cathode active material, anode active material, etc., as long as you're in partnership with somebody who will build the batteries. Interestingly, though, we do get the occasional Australian company who comes through the door who absolutely want to make Australian-made batteries, lithium-ion batteries, and they don't care what they cost. They don't want to compete with China because they want to make them for strategic reasons, for defence, for niche applications. So the ability to create offtakes in Australia for those materials is a bonus, but we can sort of go down that next step. Rare earth metals is one that comes up from time to time because, you know, obviously we've got clever people at ANSTO, where's Chris, put your hand up, who have helped Australian companies create the flow sheets that you can get the separated oxides. We're aware of at least 2 companies, and I won't mention them, who are interested in making rare earth alloys in Australia, rare earth metals. And we think, you know, that's a reasonable step. Would you go to an entire magnet manufacturing industry? Maybe not. But, you know, making those high value materials to flow on into the next step is definitely on the cards. So I'll go back to whatever makes sense, but I think there's a lot of sense out there.
Phil, in the groups that you're talking to, international groups or national groups looking at investment in that space, is there a natural inclination to think that Australia can get this far through the value chain?
I have a cocktail view about our refining and how far we go. And it's all influenced by offtake, so let's leave just that bit of the discussion aside for a moment. If we want to move fast, I think it's sensible to negotiate partners with existing technology providers, and of course it's going to be commodity specific and domain specific. But let's negotiate some technologies. Let's get tariff structures in place. Let's be very deliberate about where that product is going, and do that. And get moving, because if we start developing our own IP for everything we want to do and patents and so on, I appreciate the good work that's being done, but across the board we're going to miss the boat a little bit. So I think it's a cocktail, and so it's a blended case of bringing together what we can negotiate at a global scale about our processing and R&D development, and then what can we start to build ourselves, and maybe over a 10-year cycle that changes from importing technology to possessing the technology. And again, that needs government investment and so on. Yeah.
I in part agree with you about not reinventing the wheel and creating IP, but I think there are I'm a very parochial West Australian, so we need to acknowledge that actually our ores aren't necessarily exactly the same as other people's ores as well. And so while it might be well and good to bring on shore others who have the IP and the technology, we actually also need to recognise that we are special. And that there are things that are different about our ores. And so part of the challenges with some of the projects where we've actually, people will hold up that they've been cost overruns and time frame overruns to commissioning plants. And in part that could be put down to not fully understanding the nature and characterisation of the ores that we have here in Western Australia. So there, yes, absolutely, we need to be able to bring technology on shore, but we also need to be able to have the facilities here and the capability here and the people and the equipment here to be able to help support those international investors to understand what it is that they're dealing with, and so that they can possible flow sheets to then be able to better inform engineering design, rather than just think because it works somewhere else around the world it's going to work exactly right here in WA as well.
Thanks, Nicole. We've only got a few minutes left. I've been a very greedy person, but I am a journalist, so I do ask a lot of questions. But I would like to open it up now to anybody on the floor. Has anybody got any questions or even comments about this downstream discussion? Oh, yeah, we've just got one down here. Taylor, thank you. Just behind you.
Thanks very much to the panel. Guy Hatcher, Green Lithium. We're building lithium refining capacity in the northeast of the UK. And I think, Australians, you guys can be a bit hard on yourselves. There's some great work going on over here. Kwinana, our experience is it's lithium focused, obviously. So, you've got projects down here that are actively in construction production. They're built and up and running and producing lithium chemicals. There's work that Pilbara Minerals are doing with the Calix, looking at midstream processing. Point to anywhere else in the world that's got ex-China that's actually doing that. There's nowhere else that's doing it. So, I know you guys like to put slightly titles on panel discussions to sort of provoke thought or whatever, but you're doing okay, I think.
We just want more.
Yeah, quite, and so does everybody else, don't they?
Guy, can I ask, in the discussion that we've had here, what's your experience like on Teesside? Do you share some of the similar experiences, or are there a unique set of challenges in the UK?
So there are pros, the advantages to being in the UK and Teesside compared with Australia, and there are some advantages about being in Australia that we don't have in Teesside. It's not a simple answer. Workforce in the UK is really good. We've got a really strong chemicals workforce, trained workforce in chemicals processing, and that's one of the key advantages that we see up there. Access to renewable energy and access to the European market and proximity to market we see is really important, and the energy infrastructure up there is really solid. We're developing partnerships with Australian companies, primarily looking at supply opportunities, but also looking at export opportunities for bringing ex-China expertise as we develop refining capacity and build our knowledge, looking at opportunities in Western Australia as well for partnerships that are building supply chains that are accessing the European market and building on some of the collaboration between our nations. So, comments more really. I know there's a mission from the UK coming out in June, I think, as part of a battery metals or a further downstream look. And we've got the UK BIC, UK Battery Industrialising Centre in the UK. So there's certainly an opportunity for some knowledge sharing and collaboration for further downstream work between some UK industries that I know there's other companies and work ongoing there.
Thanks, Guy. And of course, the major advantage is that you're right near the greatest football team in all the land, who you can just walk straight to Riverside. We haven't got time, we're really running late, but the Guy brings up a great point, and the one we haven't touched about our skill, really too much, Nicole, you did slightly, but about our skills base here in Western Australia in particular, but Australia more generally. Have we got this, and Phil brought this up earlier as well, have we got the skills, both professional but trades as well, to be able to implement or execute this, any strategies that whether government or industry develop?
No, I don't think we do. And I think it's also understanding that there are different skills that we are going to need to go downstream as well. And so, West Australia has a great history and reputation around whether it's exploration geologists, mining geologists, or mining engineers, but actually they are not necessarily the skill sets that are needed to be able to move midstream. And the point was made about chemical engineers, hydrometallurgists, pyrometallurgists, all of those are skills that are in decline in Australia, and it really is a need for us in the short term to look at how do we bring those skills onshore, but to the point, how do we start growing those skills onshore in an environment where people don't like mining, where they see it as dirty, where they don't see it as part of a solution to enabling clean energies and emissions reduction. So, fundamentally, there is a real issue to getting those skills, building those skills, attracting them here, but also the community perception of those as jobs and opportunities.
Great, Nicole, thank you. Did anyone else want to tackle that one?
Just a closing comment. I guess I would have painted out this side of the panel as quite optimistic, but look, no one here denies it's going to be hard for Australia to be successful in downstreaming. Doesn't mean we can't do it. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. I've been at this job 6.5 years. We spent a huge amount of our time trying to help our members look at those potentials. We've been delighted with those who succeeded and frustrated by those who have been unable to make it happen. We're still on this journey. And the association's committed to supporting our members to get these things over the line. We want to realise more value of our minerals here in Australia. We can see the opportunities beyond just mining, and I think you can finally see government at a Commonwealth level stepping into that space. So I'm really optimistic what we'll see in the next 2 weeks and the next 12 months will be things that actually generally help us drive into that space. So I'm quite optimistic about it. I remain optimistic about it, and I think you'll find more in our industry are committed to this than you'd probably realise.
Great, thank you very much, Warren. I think we may leave it there. Thank you very much to all of our panellists, to Chris, to Nicole, to Warren, and to Phil, who you hear from in the next section. Thank you for joining us for this session.